I'm going to talk today about environmental policy and about some of the methods and approaches that I think that we should be using and some of the methods and approaches that we should not be using. Right now, there's a perspective that's become very widespread among environmental groups, environmental lobbying groups, and it's a perspective that I fundamentally disagree with. And it's that the way that you measure the success of an environmental group is how much money they can get from the government. So the sole benchmark essentially becomes how many taxpayer dollars can you shift towards environmental concern. And I can see why that sounds, initially like a good way to measure success, but there's a much better way to measure success. If you're an environmental group, the way that you measure success is by looking at air pollution, water pollution, ground pollution, emissions. I mean, that makes sense. And our goal should be not how much money can we use to fund various environmental projects. The question is, what success can we have? How can we actually reduce pollution? How can we improve our air quality and our water quality? And I'd actually like to talk about a completely free way that we can do that. It requires no laws, requires no tax money. It is something that my company, Arvin Vohra Education, has been using for years. Many small businesses have been using it for years. In fact, most small businesses use it right now. It's pervasive among the adaptive small businesses. Even the federal government is starting to get on board. They tend to be a little bit slower to adapt, but even they adapt eventually. In fact, some of the resistance that I'm seeing actually is coming from some of the bigger corporations who often are a little bit slower to evolve, and then I guess that's just the way it is. And what is that way? It's telework. It's using Skype and email and other types of net conferencing tools to allow you to do many types of work remotely. So what type of work can you do remotely? Well, first, any type of white-collar work, whether it's law, accounting, anything like that can pretty easily be done remotely. Computer programming certainly can be done remotely. In fact, if you look on YouTube, you can see an example of surgery being done remotely. In this particular situation, the surgeon was in America, and the patient was all the way in France, and the surgery was done completely remotely using a sort of robotic arms and such that mimic the motions of the surgeon's hands. The advantages of telework are pretty obvious, that you don't have to travel, and that's really where most of our air pollution comes from commuting. If we take all the people who don't have to physically move to be at work, and that's basically anybody besides people that work in construction or work in a restaurant or work in something where you're really dealing with a physical, tangible good, if you allow everybody else to work from home, or if you encourage everybody else to work from home or from a remote working site, then that transportation cost, and I don't mean the financial cost, which is certainly there, but I mean like the environmental cost of transportation, essentially ceases to exist, or at least becomes much, much, much less. Now, if we don't need that oil for transportation, I know a lot of you are thinking ahead, what else does that mean? That means that, well, if we don't need oil, well, then we don't need to go to war over oil. And I think that anybody at this point, no matter how naive, is going to at least admit to a certain level that some of our recent activities, or some of our activities over the last decade, have been at least in part motivated by our absolute economic dependence on oil. So if we shift more towards this remote work, we can reduce that immediately. I can speak from my experience. A lot of my programmers that work for Arvin Vohra Education, some of them are located as far away as Asia. They're located on the opposite end of the earth. And if I tried to do things in the old-fashioned way, I'd probably just spend all my time just flying back and forth every day. It would be a completely impractical way to do it. I mean, telework has allowed my business and so many other businesses to very fundamentally grow. And the reverse. I mean, there's so many companies, there's companies all the way in California that use my services. The problems that we're having in the environment are not really problems of transportation or emissions. They're problems of obtuseness. They're problems of companies and individuals who are resisting the new way of doing business, this completely emissions-free way of doing business that has no environmental impact whatsoever. Those that reduce telework, I don't think that we should use state power to force them to change, or that we should pass laws that force them to change, or that we should pass taxes that force them to change. We should just stop subsidizing their old way of doing business. There's a lot of push in Maryland for new road construction, new light rail construction, and that's only useful, or that's only necessary, I should say, if we don't shift to telework. If the majority, or for that matter, even half or even 10% of all people who have a job where you could do telework start doing telework we will not have that necessity, we will not have that strain on our transportation resources in Maryland, and I think the same applies to many other states.